Hello and welcome to another episode of Search Off the Record, a podcast coming to you from the Google Search team, discussing all things search and having some fun along the way. My name is Martin, and I'm joined today by John from the Search Relations team, of which I'm also part of. So in today's episode, we are going to talk about redirects. Hey John, how's it going?
Hi Martin, so good to see you.
Yeah, I'm back from a vacation, having a pretty good time, and I just stumbled across a pretty old tweet where someone used like a 301 redirect to whitehouse.gov, and then in the toolbar, in the Google toolbar, the PageRank then would show what whitehouse.gov would have as PageRank, and that would last until the next update. So that must be from the times of batch updating probably, and definitely from the times where we had the Google toolbar thing. Probably a glitch in the toolbar, or was that a glitch in the PageRank system?
So that's like a real blast from the past. I don't know. It's one of those things. I think that was kind of weird and fun, almost like what you kind of got used to at the times. So I think what happened there is you would redirect to some other site, and then our systems would say, oh, these two pages are the same page, which kind of makes sense. Like if you're redirecting to a different page, and then any page rank that was there would be applied to both of those pages in the toolbar. So I think in search, it was more like a hopeful thinking that it's like, oh, your site will rank just as well as White House. But at least it would show the toolbar page rank, which some people use to do shady things like buying and selling links.
Fun. But I mean, redirects are a genuine approach to moving something from one place to another. So there's like a bunch of questions around that as well. So for instance, what if I change the URL from one URL, like example.com/A to example.com/B for whatever reason? I'm changing CMS, I'm changing my site structure. Or if I move all my blog posts from /blogs to /articles, does that hurt my ranking? How do I need to do this? Do I need to use a 301 or a 302 and all this kind of stuff? I think it might make sense to make a starting point the HTTP redirect code, because I think HTTP redirects are probably still the go-to method for this. So John, is there a difference for us if you use a 301 or a 302 redirect in search?
There's a subtle difference between the two, because 301 is kind of like a permanent redirect where you're saying, oh, I'm permanently moving to a different location, which means you would like to have your mail forwarded to that location. And 302 is more like a temporary thing. So you go on vacation and you're like, well, my mail can actually continue to go to my old location, even though I'm not there for the time being.
Right.
That's kind of like the way of thinking about it. Is like one is a permanent move, like you're going there forever, or at least as far as you can think, kind of forever. It's like, who knows? And the other one is one where you already know ahead of time, like this is just a temporary change.
And when you say your mail gets delivered there, that's a nice picture. But I guess when you say that with regarding to search, that is signals being collected about a URL, no?
Yeah, pretty much.
Right.
Kind of like, where should we send people? If you're doing a 301 redirect, then instead of mail, you get people in the search results. Like, should we be showing your new address, or should we show kind of the old address, because the new one is kind of a temporary thing?
Right. And I think it's important to understand that these redirects make huge sense, not just for search, but also for users. Because if something has temporarily moved, and you use a 302, your browser will do this redirect at that moment. But if I type in that URL into my browser again, my browser will still make the request to that URL. Or if I click on a bookmark, or if I use a link. But if it's a 301 and it's meant to be permanent, then eventually the browser will just not even make the request to the original URL. It will know that that's a permanent redirect and only make a request to the new URL. So 301 and 302 do have a difference in the browser of your users as well as in search. So that's one thing to keep in mind, I guess.
Yeah. And I think the part that people kind of lose sleep over unnecessarily is everything around the signals that you mentioned, kind of the page rank, also the canonicalization, which kind of is the same thing. And it's not that one kind of redirect is better than the other for these. It's just a different thing. Like if you're not forwarding all of your signals, then of course your old URL keeps the signals. And if you are forwarding them, then the new URL gets those signals. So it's not that anything is lost. It's just a matter of, well, is it on the old URL or on the new URL? And like as a site owner, you can kind of choose and make that call. It's not that you're going to lose any page rank by doing one way or the other.
And what is up with the other HTTP codes? Because 301 and 302 are like the classical ones, but there's also 308 and 307, if I remember correctly, which kind of mean the same thing. I actually don't know why there's different codes for that.
I had to look this up recently. And usually, so with a 301 and 302, what is forwarded are GET requests.
Mm-hmm.
And with 307, 308, it also forwards POST requests. So if you have some kind of an API that uses POST requests, or if you have I don't know, I'd almost say like a broken setup that you have a form on one domain and the results are forwarded to a different one, then you would kind of use the 307, 308. I guess from kind of completeness point of view, if you always use them, then you're kind of like always safe. But that's kind of the difference there. I think for SEO, it doesn't really matter. It's more like, I don't know, does it work for APIs or not? And usually APIs are not something that you need to have indexed directly in search.
True. You only want the results of the APIs being used in rendering, probably. Okay, that makes sense. Speaking of rendering, there's other ways of making redirects, not necessarily HTTP redirects. Like, for instance, you could have a meta HTTP equivalent equals refresh, I think it is, tag in your HTML, or you can use a refresh header in the HTTP response directly. So those are not using HTTP response codes, but actually either HTTP headers or HTML tags. Would that still work in search, or is that a problem if I use those?
I think that would still work. So there used to be something around the meta refresh type redirects where with them you would specify a time, and basically what would happen is the browser would stay on the old page for a bit and then get forwarded to the new page. And that could make sense, for example, if you have an interstitial kind of thing where it's like, oh, we moved to a different domain kind of message that you want to show people. I rarely see that nowadays, but you could. And from our point of view, we, like you mentioned, we would render those pages and then we would see, oh, it does end up on a new URL within whatever time frame we're using for rendering. And then that would be enough for us to say, well, it's a kind of a redirect, and we would treat that as a thing. I don't know if like different time periods were like a 301 or a 302, but in general, people say to avoid the meta refresh type redirects because they're not that great for accessibility. Because if you go to the page again and you reload it, then it's like, oh, it sticks around for a while and then suddenly does something unexpected. So that seems like something where I wouldn't focus too much on the time there, and instead I keep in mind that it's kind of a, I don't know, almost like a hacky type kind of way to move to a different page.
Yeah, there are some people who don't really have control over the server side of things, and then I guess they resort to having something that lives within the content, like a meta tag in the HTML that refreshes and then redirects. But if you have only control over the content, I'd probably use a JavaScript redirect instead. It's a little, or it feels a little cleaner. I don't think it actually is a little cleaner. People can happily tell us on Twitter what they think is the cleaner way of the two. Is it the meta redirect or is it a JavaScript redirect?
Wait, you're saying like JavaScript for SEO?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, we did that for our blog, if I remember correctly. I think Gary had to use JavaScript redirects, and he really, really despised that. But he did
Oh,
it in the
great.
end, and then he didn't want to talk about it afterwards.
Oh, so cool. So Gary was doing JavaScript kind of
Yeah,
site migrations. Wow. So
and
good.
I think he still needs counseling for that. I don't know. I'm sorry for him. I see how dirty that must feel, especially for him. But okay, so now we've talked about having like one URL change into another URL. For instance, moving, I don't know, everything, or like a bunch of URLs really. For instance, moving everything under /blog into /articles. What if I use redirects to move from one domain to another? Is that a thing you would do, or is that not a good idea?
That's definitely a good idea. I mean, provided you want to change your domain name.
Yeah, let's say I have a new company name, and my company no longer is called Example. Now it's called Beispiel. And we want to move from, it's like moving a restaurant, I guess. It's like if I have a restaurant in a place somewhere, and then I put up a sign saying, we have moved to this other place, then people will know, oh, I know what to expect because it's the same place. It's just it's the same restaurant. It's just in a different place. Versus if I just don't have a sign redirecting people to the new address, they might be like, Martin's restaurant is gone, so we have to find a new one. Oh, there's this other one. Maybe it's okay. I don't know. So is it similar if I do that?
Yeah.
With a redirect on my... Okay. And I would have to redirect everything, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Everything. So all pages, ideally one-to-one, redirecting them to the new site. And essentially, that's kind of the recommended approach. And I kind of like your example of a restaurant because you have some feelings associated with the restaurant that you already know. And if you know that they just moved to a different location, then it's like, well, you can take those feelings with you and go to the new locations and go there with high expectations, I guess. Whereas if you don't know anything about the other site, kind of like it's, oh, a random restaurant opened up here and it looks the same. You kind of don't have those expectations or hopes or whatever you're looking for in a restaurant.
Mm. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so that makes sense. But what if I make things a little more complicated? Let's say my company merges with another company and now one top-level domain needs to serve both companies, but there's not necessarily, well, okay, if there's a one-to-one mapping from URLs from one side to the new site, it's probably fine. But what happens if there isn't?
I think you can't really do a one-to-one mapping because things like a homepage, like who gets the homepage?
True.
It's like,
Yeah, true.
Fight it
Who
out.
gets
It's like, good luck. Or if both people have a blogs folder, it's like, oh, good
yeah.
luck with that. I think, especially with merging and splitting domains, which kind of happens sometimes.
True, that might also happen. Yeah, the inverse, where you have one thing and then you split it out into multiple things. Oh, okay. Yeah, how does that work?
It's complicated. So that's
no.
kind of like the short answer. With pure domain moves, it's a lot easier for us to recognize, oh, everything is going to this other domain. We can just like shuffle everything over. And all the internal linkings will just be the same thing. And all the structured data is all the same stuff again. Whereas if you're doing a merge or a split, then kind of you have to reassess the whole website first. And that's something that can take quite a bit of time. Like how does the internal linking work across these different sites? Which of the pages on these sites are the most important ones? That's something where if you're just moving, like Google kind of has a sense of what is important on a site. But as soon as you merge or you split things up, it's like, I don't know, like how do you figure out what is more important now? And with that, I think in search, you would see, I don't know, like longer term fluctuations, which is kind of a code word for everything will go downhill and you will panic for a while. And then suddenly it kind of flattens out and gets a little bit back to normal, hopefully, depending on how the new website looks. But that's kind of like you almost have to go through with it anyways. Like if you're merging or splitting a company, it's going to be painful no matter what. It's not like there's this SEO trick that makes everything easy.
Okay, but if I'm already in murky waters, is it a good idea to then also rework my content at the same time, or should I not do that? Should I just be like, okay, I'm trading as carefully as I can here because I'm already in trouble, or is that an opportunity to be like, well,
yeah. I mean, you're not in trouble. It's not that Google thinks it's a bad site because you had to merge. I don't know, like Google doesn't have a sense of that. It's more like a technical thing. And whether you want to kind of complicate things by also changing the content, or if you want to do that later on, that's kind of up to you. Some people like to make the changes as small as possible so that you kind of know where the issue comes from if something goes wrong. But with a site merging or site splitting, I don't know, it's almost impossible to do anything around kind of keeping things separated out. Because it's like you have to change the logo and the name everywhere, and then the design has to change everywhere. You can't just say, well, we're going to merge these two websites, but they're going to look completely separate for, 6 months.
Okay.
Like from a practical point of view, like you can't really do that. I mean, maybe you can if you're like the boss of the new company, but it seems like a really weird thing from a user point of view. You go to the new website and half of it looks like this company, half looks like a different company. It's like, why did you guys merge?
Okay, but do these longer term fluctuations also happen if I'm only moving part of my site to, let's say, like I have a blog that's really successful, but it's on a topic unrelated or less related to the rest of the website. So eventually I'll pop it out into its own domain. Does that also mean that there will be fluctuations on the original domain, or is it just eventually picking up for the redirected parts on the new domain?
Well, I guess it depends on how relevant or how prominent the part of the content is on the domain. Like if you're an e-commerce site and you have one product that is super successful and you say, well, I'll just pop this one product out to a separate domain, then of course, like the e-commerce site will rank differently because like suddenly the most important thing is gone and it's over on a different website. So kind of like a lot of stuff will go over to the new website. Some things will remain on the old website. There will be effects on both sides. And in practice, even if it's like not the most important thing, it will kind of settle down into a new equilibrium.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Fun. But then there's redirects that I really don't like. For instance, when I'm in Switzerland and I want to look at a German website in Germany and they're like, oh, you want this product that is only sold in Germany, which you could buy and then pick up from the other side of the border. But no, we are forcefully redirecting you to the Swiss website where this product doesn't exist. Is that an acceptable thing? Is there a better setup for this? Like, how do you feel about that?
Are you talking about the Google Store?
No, I would never talk about the Google Store on this podcast. No, it's not just the Google Store.
This is one of those things that I had to get used to when I came to Switzerland. It's like you can get everything worldwide on the internet, except if you're in Switzerland, like they lock you out. It's so annoying. And content-wise, I think is even more annoying because usually you can tell that the content exists. Like you can find it in search, you click on a link, and then it's like, oh, I'm sorry. There's nothing here for you to see because you're in the wrong country. And usually they don't even tell you why. It's like, oh, it doesn't exist. And you're like, what actually happened? From a practical point of view for SEO, the thing that matters is where Googlebot is crawling from. Mm-hmm. And for most content in Europe, we probably crawl from the US. So if they also do this thing for people in the US where they say, oh, I'm sorry, our product is only for people in Germany, you can't see anything if you're in the US, then we would not index that. So from kind of a practical point of view, I try to discourage that as much as possible, not just because I'm in Switzerland, but because you could inadvertently kind of be ruining your search results by also telling Googlebot, oh, there's nothing for you to see here.
Okay, so that's not a good way of doing it. I guess having like some sort of menu option or having something in the content that allows you to switch countries is probably a better way to do that than doing this forceful redirects. Yeah.
Usually something like a banner, or maybe even as simple as not having a checkout link where they say, well, you can't buy this product, but here, like the technical details and like all of this, that's usually a better thing. Or even with a banner where you say, well, you can't order it to addresses in Switzerland, but if you can send it to your friend in Germany, like, well, go for it.
Yeah. All right. That's fair. And what about if you say banners, what about these interstitials? Like, hey, are you this old, or are you allowed to be here because you are from this other country that should not be on this shop? Is like an interstitial kind of like a banner, or is it more like a redirect for Google search?
Some kinds of interstitials are technically implemented as redirects, where they redirect you to this interstitial page.
Oh, no. Okay, that's bad. Yeah.
And then they redirect you back once you've filled out the form. And of course, Googlebot is like redirected and like, oh, there's a form here. I don't know what to do. I'm so lost. Whereas every 12-year-old kid is like, oh, yes, of course I'm 18. So it feels like probably you're blocking bots more than you're blocking actual users from looking at the content. But I mean, from a legal point of view, it's like you have to do what you have to do. I kind of understand that. But if you do need to do this kind of thing, don't do a redirect. Do something like a div on top of the content that blocks the content and then goes away, because Googlebot will still be able to render the content below the div and use that for indexing at least.
So that's similar to when people are trying to protect from bots, right? Where they basically redirect you back, do some sort of captcha to determine that you're a human, and then redirect you back. So that the Googlebot will fall into the same trap, I guess.
Exactly. I mean, you're trying to block bots, and Googlebot is a bot. So you might not realize that you're actually blocking good bots as well. I mean, that's assuming you're okay with Googlebot crawling your page. Some people say, well, I don't want any bots at all, and I don't want to be listed in Google, and that's totally fine. That's their decision to make.
Fair enough. And then last but not least are the mobile and desktop redirects. Like if you are sensing a certain viewport, then the website assumes, oh, this is mobile, so I'll redirect to the mobile version. There's a bunch of websites that still do that, even especially if they have a separate m.domain. domain. It's like, oh, your viewport is too small. I'll go to m.something.com and give you like a reduced version. Is Googlebot happy with that? Probably not. Also, especially if there's content missing, right?
Yeah, with mobile first indexing, we try to index the mobile version. So we would crawl with the smartphone Googlebot and see this redirect to m. And we would expect that the content is equivalent. And for the most part, it is. And for that kind of redirect, like from a technical point of view, a 302 redirect would be the right one, because next time someone goes there, you don't really know if they want to go to the mobile version or a desktop version. The other important part is that you do the same from mobile to desktop. So don't just redirect mobile users to the mobile version, but also redirect desktop users to the desktop version, because otherwise Google will assume that everything is actually on the mobile version. So that's kind of the thing to watch out for there. And yeah.
Oh, fun times. One last thing. I noticed something in the URL inspection tool.
Uh-oh.
When I have a website that redirects from one URL to the other, URL inspection tool shows me a 200 OK. Why is that?
It's because we want to show you what we would use for indexing. That's kind of the short answer. It's not like we would like to troll you because we know you're trying to look for a 301 and we're going to show you a 200.
Right.
It's more that, well, this is what Googlebot would use for indexing, which is kind of the final page.
True. It's also using the target URL. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Oh.
we would probably also do that for JavaScript type redirects, where we would try to render the page. And by rendering it, that would include whatever JavaScript redirect that you do.
We do, yeah. That's true. That is true. I tested that. That also seems to be behaving the same way. And now that you say it like that, it makes sense. We obviously want to show what is actually ending up in the index or potentially ending up in the index. And that's the target page, not the source page. That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense when you know it, which is kind of, to me, also a sign that things are a bit confusing. So maybe at some point we should find a way to make that a little bit clearer in Search Console, to at least say, oh, by the way, we followed a redirect along the way. Because especially if you're trying to diagnose your redirects and you're doing something fancy on maybe a country basis or something else, and you're like, why doesn't Google see this redirect that I spent so much time on? Then once you kind of ask the right people or read the right documentation, you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, you're right about that. We should probably do something in the UI or at least give people a hint. Yeah, good point. Anyway, thank you so much, John, for answering all my stupid questions about redirects. I hope that was useful and interesting to everyone out there.
Thanks for having me, Martin.
All right. In that case, everybody, that's it for this episode. I do hope that you enjoyed it and found it useful and a little bit entertaining maybe as well. In the next episode, we will be talking to Jennifer Slag as part of our Spotlight series. We've been having fun with these podcast episodes, and we hope that you, the listener, have found them both entertaining and insightful too. Feel free to drop us a note on Twitter at Google Search C, or chat with us at one of the next upcoming events that we go to if you have any thoughts. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Goodbye.